Buenas hafa day, Guahusi Pulan, and this is Pulan Speaks, and we are here with three special guests who are undergraduates at our very own University of Guam. And what makes them special is that they are STEM majors, and they are here to speak about STEM and to speak about how that may connect with Chamorro culture and identity. So, let's have them introduce themselves right now. So tell us a bit about yourselves.
Hafade. My name is William Sablan. I'm a fourth year at UOG majoring in mathematics, and I'm planning to going to UC Riverside this fall.
Hafade. My name is Ahmi Cacapit, but most people call me Ahmi. And I'm a senior undergraduate majoring in biology, and I'm planning to go to Scripps Institution of Oceanography this fall.
Hafade Guahusi Laura Gombar. I am currently a biology major as well, and I'll be graduating this spring semester. After I graduate, I plan to pursue graduate school here at the University of Guam, majoring in biology once more.
What exactly does STEM mean?
STEM is usually the abbreviation for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and it's typically used when trying to address like educational or curriculum policies and such. And it's really just an umbrella term for natural sciences.
What are ways, from your views, that we can grow the local STEM community?
I'll go ahead and jump in on this one first. So I definitely think we can grow the STEM community through outreach. That's one of the main ways we do it right now. The way it works with outreach is, in a sense, those who are already in STEM conduct research, they gain information, and this is information that the public might not be aware of already, or maybe they are aware of, but they could just learn a little bit more about it. And so what we do is we take that information and we put it into outreach material, flyers, volunteer opportunities, brochures, anything that the public can kind of get their hands on physically, and then they can learn more. And from there, that's where we say like, hey, this is tied into STEM. These are some of the things that we do. Do you find this interesting? And majority of the time, people are definitely interested in what we present through outreach, whether it be reef-safe sunscreens, saving the sea turtles by decreasing plastic use, native and invasive species outreach. And so these are things that the public sees every day. And by coming to them with the outreach materials, they realize that they can take it a step further by participating in STEM and trying to help solve these issues as well.
To add on to Laura, I think science communication is a big outlet to getting these messages out into the community. Outreach isn't just for like young children, it's also for adults who may not be aware of these issues. So finding your target audience and catering your message to a way that they'll understand it best and they'll relate to it best is one way that we can get the local community more involved in STEM, not just necessarily in the research part, but in the community level and executing our plans for how we can better sustain our island and our people.
Yeah, I fully agree that outreach is a very important part of growing the local STEM community, and investing into that education and such as like creating programs like after school programs or research programs for local students will definitely pay off in the long run for helping to create new generations of scientists for this island.
Wow, those are very excellent answers, everyone. So outreach, that's one of the most important things. And what was said is that, it's not just for the young people, it's also for older people as well. So those were great points overall. So how then can STEM, how could this benefit the community of Guam? What are ways in which it could benefit our community?
Yeah, so like Laura said, there are different topics being brought up, especially for Guam's community regarding plastic and our oceans and our forests here in Guam. And so ways that our students can benefit and our community can benefit is getting involved in the research. So we have a couple local research programs here, even at the high school level, at the middle school level with our science fairs, and getting and fostering this sort of scientific thinking at an early age will really promote these scholars so that they can believe they can pursue STEM earlier and later in their education. Other ways are through activities where the community can get involved. There's like seaweed pulling where it'll help coral reefs recover from stressors. Those are different activities, like even beach cleanups are a part of STEM because it shows like how plastic is affecting our coasts and our environments here. And so there's little activities that people incorporate daily that they may not know is STEM related, but it all circles back because they're overall contributing to sustaining our island and bettering our understanding of what we're doing to our land.
I agree as well that it's important for people to be involved to help better our island. And I think for me, particularly with mathematics, I think it can really empower people to better understand things like statistics, for example. With this new age of like politics and coronavirus going on, I think it's important to have these skills in your life to better understand the data that's happening, the story behind it, and like what decisions you should make from it.
Yes, I definitely agree with what Will and Ahmi said. And just to add on, especially in terms of starting the love for STEM at an early age with the youth, throughout my time here at UOG and the various internships I've taken part in, I've noticed there are so many more opportunities for students to take part in STEM now than there were when I was in high school. It was mostly, I want to say, medical-based biology internships, but I've noticed now there are so many different opportunities for students to get involved in the environmental side of biology here on island. And that's so important because Guam is considered a biodiversity hotspot, meaning there's so many different species, whether it's animals or plants, and there's so much to be done. And to expose the students to this or the community in general at such a young age and build from there, I think it's crucial to improving and growing STEM here on island.
And so now we're going to get into more of the CHamoru and politics base about this. And I was told that all three of you are CHamoru. And so this would be very interesting. So, the first of all, from your personal beliefs, do you believe that we can and should separate politics from STEM?
I don't think we can even separate politics from science, and I don't think we should because they work hand in hand, really. And you can see this, for example, in funding. In mathematics, for example, the Department of Defense in the United States is one of the biggest sources of funding for mathematicians. And then you'll see this play out in the national laboratories and the projects they do, whether that be improving military technology, for example. So I think politics does play a big role in science, and we shouldn't pretend that so sciences are abstract and they're devoid of politics. I think we should re-emphasize the ethics of what we do when we're doing science.
Yeah, to add on to Will, I think as a scientist, you sort of develop this code of ethics that you conduct and carry on through your daily life, and you consider the effects, whether how your science is taken to the public, and that puts it in a political view. And mostly politics reacts with science and science reacts with politics. And like Will said, funding is a big driver of what is being highlighted in science. And so I think at the community level, if we voice up these opinions on what matter most to us, then politics will listen, and then the funding will listen, and so the science will get better. And so it really is at the community level that we can drive and bridge the sort of gap that people have or is created between politics and science to sort of mesh it together, and that it will be beneficial for the community overall.
I definitely agree, especially the part about funding. There are so many projects that the Department of Defense is already funding in terms of conservation with native species that are endangered. And like I said earlier, the public might not be aware of a lot of these things. And so that's why politics is kind of a sensitive issue. And that's where outreach could come into play, is let's do some outreach on the projects that they're funding. And that way politics and science can kind of go hand in hand, and there's no need to separate them if the outcome overall is conservation and it's a positive thing.
So see, Laura, so from your experience, how aware would you say is the local STEM community of CHamoru cultural and political rights and these issues concerning self-determination here on Guam?
I would say that there is a good amount of people who are already aware of the issue regarding self-determination, especially in the STEM community. However, I do know there are a few people who aren't. I believe a couple of days ago, I had a meeting with a few friends of mine, and we were discussing this, and a lot of them hadn't even known that self-determination was an option for the island. They thought colonization, that's it. They had no clue that these were options and that this was even an issue. And I was so amazed. And so that's definitely something to consider too, is while the STEM community is definitely very aware of it, sometimes we do get a little buried in our STEM work and our research that we don't have time to look at what's going on around us. So I definitely do think it's important for people in the STEM community to kind of take a break, get our head out of the water, look up, get some fresh air, and remember what else is going on around us.
Yeah, I think that's also especially true in math. I think mathematicians might sometimes be so absorbed in their works and the abstractness of it all. But it's important for us to recognize that these indigenous issues here on this island do affect us as well. And we shouldn't pretend as though it's a separate issue from our own work, and that we need to support these problems and work towards working with others to help solve these issues.
Yeah, there's definitely a gap between most scientists and the issues of the community where science is conducted, because in reality, research everywhere is being done by people who usually aren't from a place. So the program, the PhD program, which I'm going to, they do research all over the world. And there's so many local and indigenous issues that cannot be encompassed in one research trip that there is sort of a disconnect, but that's why there's a need for more local researchers to be involved in these projects so that the scientists are aware of these issues. They're aware of the land that they're on, the community that they're affecting, and the people that live there overall. Because once a study is done, sometimes researchers will just leave it as an afterthought when in the reality, there's like a whole island community here.
So you were mentioning one thing there, Siami, about awareness and how there may be a disconnect with some scientists and with the local community they're working on. So what are ways that ideas that you have that we could bring more awareness about these issues to the STEM community?
Like Laura mentioned, there's outreach where researchers can explain their science to the public. I fully think that within that plan, it should be a two-way street where the public should explain their culture, their values to the scientists. And I think incorporating that more into projects and into overall research proposals will really help scientists understand like how they're affecting people. For example, visiting researchers here can understand more about invasive species by learning the background behind the introduction of the brown tree snakes here, and hopefully seeing the catalyst for that certain issue that can give them more insight into how we can tackle the problem and to prevent future problems like that occurring here on island. There is a section called a broader impacts usually in most proposals where they view this community outreach and they sort of advertise how they'll be conducting this outreach to the public. And I think more of these scientists should actually be willing to open up their ears and their mind into like our point of view and our insight. It should be a two-way street because we shouldn't look up to them like, oh, they're on a higher level because they conduct this science the right way. When we know we have our own traditional knowledge that maybe will open up their point of view. And it's a give and take. Science is an exchange of knowledge. And I think that'll really help them, especially incorporating and understanding these values.
As Ahmi was giving her opinion on it, something did come to mind, and it's something that somebody mentioned when Ahmi and I were out attending a conference in Hawaii that supports Indigenous people in STEM. And I thought it was really interesting, and I definitely think it ties into the topic we're discussing right now. I can't recall his name. He was definitely a scientist at one of the universities, but he mentioned the Indigenous people are the first ones who will notice changes on the island. They are, in a sense, the first members of STEM. If the waves are coming in at higher levels, they're the first to notice. If the winds are warmer, they're the first to notice. If the trees aren't growing or fruiting like they used to because something is off, the Indigenous people are the first ones to notice. And I think that's really important because, like you said, when looking at STEM and the issue we have right now in terms of self-determination, the indigenous people are the first ones to notice a lot of things. And I think that's very important to take into consideration. And I think us, at least the three of us here as indigenous scientists, as CHamoru scientists in a sense, we're also the first to notice quite a few things. Being from here, being scientists, born and raised and educated in our home.
Thank you for that. That was a very nice thing you're talking about there, where you brought up that experience in Hawaii about how it's the indigenous people that will realize these things first, and what that person said, which is they are the first STEM people there. And the music in the background was really moving with what you're saying. I just have to say that. And see, Will, would you like to add anything or say anything?
Sure, yeah. Just a few things to add. I think that indigenous people, I guess, building these communities in STEM is also an important way for us to help make our voices be heard. I think us coming together and recognizing that we have some common issues amongst different indigenous peoples will help us to have our voice be heard among the larger STEM community. And I think that allies can also open their ears to what we have to say, and hopefully take action to help us address these problems.
Like Will said, opening up spaces, especially for these conversations in a STEM setting. So like in a university setting and a laboratory setting, opening up these conversations. It shouldn't have to be at an activist rally or at a decolonization rally. These are conversations that are to be had like every day. And we need to show and prioritize this importance, because I think having this space, a safe space to talk about this, will really lighten up and make more people comfortable and more educated on how ways that they can learn about decolonization. I think that there should be spaces in STEM, especially in the university setting or a laboratory setting, that provides people with open conversations to talk about this on a daily, rather than just waiting for like a political rally where they might feel less inclined to use their voice and be heard. But if we open these conversations and make them comfortable, then it'll definitely encourage more scientists to be more willing to talk about it and voice their opinion.
Right. That's a good point right there. Normalize these conversations. It doesn't just have to be, as you said, at a protest or a political rally. It could be anywhere really. And so then what would you then say, Ahmi, to people who say, why are you making this so political? Why can't we just be like the good old days and just talk science without bringing in the, decolonization and all that stuff? Why can't we just do that? Isn't that preferential treatment? Isn't that making it too political? What would you say to that?
I would say that if you don't think science has a narrative, then you're truly missing the potential and the application for science, because what is science without the use of its people? And if you aren't listening to the people, then really, how is your science being helpful? How is it being effective? How is it being important to us? And why should we care? And I think these conversations of decolonization really are affecting local scientists here, local community here. And the more voices that are being heard, the more attainable that goal seems to be.
How can we make STEM education, how can we make this more relevant, more meaningful for indigenous peoples, such as the Chamorus or in other places?
In terms of getting STEM and its importance out with the indigenous people, I think it's important to start where they're familiar. I think that's a good stepping stone. You don't want to start discussing a topic in STEM. Let's say we look at how genomes of indigenous people aren't analyzed. That's a big step for some people in the community. What's a genome? It's an overwhelming thing. And then that kind of scares them away from wanting to look into it. And so I think it's important to start where people are familiar, where people are comfortable. We can start by talking about the firing range and the Serianthi Melphonia, and then that's where you introduce them. Hey, there's a tree. It's called Hudson Lagu. It's the only one of its kind as an adult. And then from there, we can start introducing them to more native plant species. We can talk about how some of these native plant species are used by the Suruhana, like Nanasu, Scaevola toccata. It's the same plant, but Nanasu is used by Suruhanas for eye irritants. There's also the kalal fern, which they use and boil for respiratory ailments. And these are things that we look at in their native plants. So to tie indigenous knowledge and STEM together by starting in a place that's familiar to our people, I think that's the best way to start incorporating STEM into our community without scaring people away, because it can be overwhelming if it's introduced in the wrong manner.
To add to that, I think it's important in order for us to grow STEM within our local community, to place our science in the context of what's happening here on this island. If you're doing word problems in math and you read, oh, this person's going 5 miles per hour down this block, you don't know what that is. You don't know what a block is since you're living here in like a village or something like that. So I think changing like narrative, like Ahmi said, to what's happening here is important, so that students can recognize that their identity as like a Chamorro or a Filipino is consistent with their identity as a scientist as well, that they're not opposing things. And so the goal should be to have students say that they're proud to be scientists and that they're proud to be Chamorro or Micronesian.
Acknowledging our young students' identity and what role it plays in not just as a scientist, but as a person themselves, and how they can build and grow through this knowledge. It'll definitely make it more relatable, and they'll definitely see that they have a place in this community rather than conforming to maybe a more Western ideology of what a scientist should be. So having these sort of role models, especially Chamorro scientists or Micronesian scientists to look up to, that's one way where they can see themselves. So it's not exactly like, oh, I can never get there because I'm from a small island. One, that shouldn't never be the case. It should be like, I can get there because I'm from a small island, and this is what I can do, and this is what I bring to the table.
How can STEM be utilized to specifically promote and benefit Samoru or indigenous cultural and political rights?
Because we're in STEM, who were born and raised here, not only raised as an indigenous person, but raised as an indigenous scientist, I think our perspective on a lot of things is really important, and it makes us stand out. And so it kind of begs the question, if a lot of programs are seeking, and you'll see it, students will see it in the applications, programs are always, oh, are you a Pacific Islander? Do you have this indigenous perspective? And that's because, in a sense, we have something that a lot of the other people don't have, because we come from such an isolated area and such a small community. And so in my mind, it's kind of, our perspective in STEM is so valued out there. And I think if we work on that, and if we put ourselves out there through STEM, there may be a possibility where, because we've made such a name for ourselves out there using STEM, we could be heard a little bit better in terms of self-determination and the we're facing.
Again, like us Chamorros have that unique perspective of things here on Guam, and like we best understand our own community and the issues that we face. So I think empowering our own people through STEM, educating them, having them better understand science and mathematics, again, will help better empower us and cultivate our potential towards working towards solving like issues, for example, like self-determination and determining our own political status.
I agree with what Laura and Will said. There's also different applications through STEM. So a lot of community members are organizing through technology such as apps and social media, YouTube, all these different platforms to get the message across, and that wouldn't be there. And if more creators and scientists work together, they can possibly utilize like more projects running, but with the political outlook look like if we did decolonize? What would the land look like? Experiments can be done to kind of see and predict what our future of our island will look like through experiments and modeling. So I think those can also be beneficial in helping the community gauge how decolonization would work and how it can be executed. And also it can connect the community through all these different aspects of STEM, like Laura said. If we get our voices out there because we are in science, we sort of have this network and people who will listen to us, and using that voice is definitely one way where we'll get our point across and people will actually take us seriously, rather we'll utilize our voice in STEM to also address these issues. It wouldn't solely be focused on science, just like researchers or some researchers before have, but it'll definitely ease into the conversation of where we can be.
So how would you say that your perspective on the politics, your perspective on the community, your perspective on STEM, how does that differ from your non-CHamoru classmates?
These political topics are more on the back end. They're not at the forethought of their minds because they're not necessarily the ones, like their targeted audience. And they can either be an ally or they can just choose to ignore the topic. But luckily, at least for me, I'm in a very comfortable community where they actually are very supportive of these views. And that seems promising as more people open up. I think it's diverse. I guess it depends on who you talk to. For example, my peers, they align more with our views and our opinions.
Ahmi, Will, and I, we all have the same friend group. The STEM community here on island is very close-knit, whether you be CHamoru or not. But one thing I have noticed is that because we are CHamoru, we do feel very strongly about our rights and self-determination and CHamoru politics. However, with our people who are non-CHamoru, we have a lot of support from them. Some do come out to the rallies and, they take part in it. However, I do think for some people, not all of course, but for some, because they don't have that CHamoru identity, they're more geared toward helping indigenous people rather than CHamoru specifically. And that's only because they weren't raised with the CHamoru values. They don't understand our struggle because they aren't coming from where we're coming from. But nonetheless, they do support rights for indigenous people. And that's where they come into play. And they say like, I'm not CHamoru, but you're an indigenous person. I'm an indigenous person. I want to be there for you. And I've seen it. Like I said earlier, I've met with friends, both of whom weren't CHamoru, and this was just over coffee, no rally, no formal setting to discuss it. And we're just talking about, self-determination, being independent, statehood, association. And so even though they weren't CHamoru, because they saw how important it was to me and because they are indigenous people, they found the topic very interesting and they were there to listen right away and to become educated on it.
I also have the same personal experience where even though a lot of my friends and classmates who may not be CHamoru, who are not CHamoru, they can still be very supportive of my issues that I face as someone who is CHamoru. They are allies who are there for me and who support me. But I have had experiences when I've done research in the United States, continental United States, where I've met people who weren't outright against me whenever I brought up some of the issues that I expressed about people that here on Guam face, but it more, how do I say this, came off as though, like you said, why are you bringing this up? You're kind of ruining the mood. We're here to talk about math, why are you bringing this up? I'm the party killer here. And to me, that felt, I guess, very offensive. And I guess because it makes me feel as though, how am I expected to do any work or be productive when I feel as though I'm not safe in these places and they don't recognize my humanity? But again, this isn't all people. I've also come across other friends that I've met in the US other minority students who've expressed a lot of support for what issues that I brought up with them, and they tell me too about the problems that they face, and they recognize our similarities and our common issues that we face despite our differences. So although there are people who are not Chamorro who may not agree with you per se, I think there are definitely a lot of people who do support us and issues that we face.
Yeah, Will just made me go back to a flashback where I went to a research program and I applied and I submitted my application and got accepted. And they're like, "Oh, what country are you from? You're from Guam." I didn't see it listed. I didn't accept your zip code because it's not US. And these sort of conversations open up for the topic on Guam's political status and what we mean to the US, and sort of bridging that gap in knowledge between people who are in the continental United States who may not know our history and our people. That definitely opens up into the political issues here.
Why should STEM majors, at least here on Guam, why should they even care about, indigenous issues? Why should they even care about, the political status of Guam, about some other cultural issues? Why should they care?
Like Ahmi and Laura have said, science is the people behind it. Science is the scientists who do it. And recognizing that these issues that affect people, affects the fields as whole. If our goal in science is to create knowledge, right, and to have it be effective and be used in our communities, then we must recognize that these issues that people face are issues that us scientists need to come forward and support. And I think that one great example of this were scientists coming forward when I think it was this astronomy research scope or whatever being built in Hawaii. I saw like a lot of scientists come forward saying that although like these telescopes or whatever are important for science, recognizing the rights of indigenous people are more important at that moment. So I think that's one great example of how scientists should come forward to support indigenous rights and why it is important.
Oh my goodness. I mean, for starters, this is our home. This is where we were raised in terms of, like I said earlier, we were raised here not only as indigenous people, not only as Chamorro people, but in the STEM community, we were raised here as scientists. And to see your home change over time and to see how you could possibly help that impact and address it, help to address the impact. I think that's so important, and that's why we should care. That's why being a Chamorro in STEM is so important, is because this is your home, this is who you are, and to see what you were raised with start changing, to see species slowly becoming endangered, to hear your grandparents talk about birds all over the place, and then to see no birds because of introductions of invasive species that we could one day help to eradicate. That's why we should care. That's why being a Chamorro in STEM is so important. And like we've been mentioning all throughout this talk, is indigenous people have the upper hand because we have a different perspective. We have a different narrative. And it's one thing for someone to come in and see that Guam has no birds. They'll just be like, well, there's no birds. What can you do? But to go from here to Saipan or Rota and to see birds and bats flying overhead, you realize how much has changed here on our island specifically. And that's why I think we as Chamorro people in STEM should care. That's why it matters.
I think STEM majors specifically, or anyone in STEM here on Guam at least, should care because it'll affect them. Once these conversations start gauging up, you'll want to see where you'll be in science once we decolonize and what those futures sort of look like and where you'll sort of fit into that. And I think being aware of that situation affects you, and it'll affect the reality of your work and generations later and generations of future scientists and how they'll conduct science. So it definitely matters to the science, but like Laura said, it matters more because it's the people who are living. You aren't a scientist 24/7, you're a human 24/7. And understanding what other humans around you, especially Chamorros here on Guam, are facing, it'll make you connect more to your community, because that really is the goal of science, is improving your community.
Gotcha. So now just the last thing is, what do y'all plan to do after graduation?
After graduation, so I'm currently working as a research assistant at the Center for Island Sustainability. So I love it. We go out, we get to do a lot of projects and work with a lot of endangered species, which I think is great and very important. After I graduate, I hope to continue working there for a while. I've been considering working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to continue working in conservation. Conservation is something I hold very near and dear to my heart. I hope to one day, see our endangered species populations kind of increase and thrive. And so after I graduate, I plan to continue working in conservation while getting my master's in biology here at UOG.
As for me, right now, I'm close to graduating. I'm right now a teaching assistant at the mathematics tutor lab. But once I do graduate, I plan on going to UC Riverside to pursue my PhD in pure mathematics. And my goal really is to help other students, and more specifically students on Guam, to recognize that they have the capacity to find their potential and do well in mathematics and enjoy it, find the beauty within it. So my hope is that once I do attain my PhD in mathematics, I'll be able to come back to Guam and hopefully be able to institute maybe a math club or some math program here on island to help local students recognize their potential for doing mathematics and recognize that they too can do it and find the beauty in it.
Will also be pursuing my PhD in marine biology in the fall at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I plan to study coral reefs all around the Pacific and see how these reefs are changing within these islands, and hopefully come back here and learn more about our reefs, because that was one of my main points to my advisor, was that I want to make it impactful for my island. And like Will, I also want to come back and serve as faculty member at UOG and hopefully indigenize STEM and, get more Chamorros into the programs and show them that the local community does have the talent to succeed in this field. And I think that's very important.
Dunkalu Sedus Masi, Toru Hamzu, si Will, si Ahmi, si Laura. Those are great answers. They're very inspirational answers, and I think I'm just like two or 3 years older than y'all. So wow, that's just amazing seeing our generation, really want to better our island and really want to, just change for the better this place that we call home and this love that we have, instead of just desiring to just go off island and have the American dream, just living in California or something like that. So that's really moving, really inspiring. So any last words from anyone before we end?
Yeah, all of us are very active in our collegiate organizations. So we have access to a lot of resources where if you do, or if any of the audience members wants to get involved in STEM, you can leave our contacts and we can email you and provide some helpful links. And if they ever want to chat or have any questions about being in STEM, we definitely have a lot of resources that we can offer them.
To add what Ahmi said, putting our contact information out there just so that the youth can kind of reach out to us. Not only the youth, but even, I guess, anyone who's watching this video, whether they be from a younger age to an older one, have any questions about any of the work we're doing or any opportunities that UOG has to offer, or even outside organizations, because all three of us have had some experience conducting research where the indigenous perspective is valued out in the mainland. So if anyone has questions about that as well, or just any opportunities from volunteering to internship to jobs, I can speak for all three of us where I say we'd be very happy to help.
Thank you very much, Toru Hamzu. Thank you very much. Again, for everyone watching, these are 3 future scientists, future faculty members, possibly future movers in the community here on Guam, right? So Sedus Masi for watching. Esther.